Hello, and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guild House. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host, Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across the tabletop RPG and, shockingly enough, the DMsGuild space. And this week, I'm honoured to be joined by Beth Ball. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me. How are we doing today?
Doing pretty well. It's nice and toasty over here, well, inside, and then ice is melting outside, so all set.
Yeah, it's like that. Eventually, the warmth of the inside will radiate out, and it'll be that sort of like, the in those all sort of like animated films when the evil ice curse gets lifted.
Yes, and it just melts and
everything is magically green again, despite being frozen. Like, you just kind of hand wave all the sort of logistics of plants being frozen for a long time.
there's no mud. It's just green and perfect.
Yeah, like I said, I realized, I'm now envious of a animated world immediately. but that aside, so for the people listening, then, what are some of the things that they might know you for, or what sort of things? What'd you get up to?
Sure. So I think I'm best known for my work for D&D Duet, where my husband and I write one-on-one adventures for D&D. We have several listed on DMsGuild. We have some listed on our own website and on RPG, and we write, in addition to the adventures, advice for people playing D&D in the one-on-one style.
No, it's incredible. I must admit, I do love the kind of attention that D&D Duet and just like the idea of like these kind of one-on-one sessions. I imagine it's I guess in your expert opinion, how different would you say writing an adventure for a duet is compared to a slightly more broader sort of more, I guess, like a group one shot comparatively?
Yeah, I think that there are different considerations that are important for the designer to keep in mind. But there are also some things that I think you can do more of in a one-on-one one-shot than you can or in perhaps a group adventure. So for me, it's always really important to have a strong, vibrant NPC so that the PC has someone to interact with. We always suggest for people, if they're playing one-on-one, to have a DMPC of some kind, because you need someone for the there's the dog. You need someone for the player to interact with and talk to, and I think that helps with immersion. But perhaps in a one-shot, you've got the quest giver, here you go on this adventure. In a duet game, I think it's more likely for that NPC to go with the party, or at least interact with them more. So that's something to keep in mind. We also have, and maybe it's more from our website than is true for one-on-one D&D in general, but we have lots of new DMs and new players coming in and playing in this particular way. And so I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind too, is how can you kind of foster and help a new DM who maybe isn't going to be so comfortable scaling a combat kind of in the moment, and so kind of giving them those ideas. So for a one-on-one game, my PC always has a sidekick or someone with her. So if I were playing someone else's adventure, I'm coming in with two characters.
Yeah.
That's going to be a really different scale than somebody who's coming in with just their one wizard versus their one barbarian. And so there is necessarily that kind of range. And I know that's true for parties too, but I think that giving scaling tips and some of the flexibility that you as the designer are aware of as you're putting it together can really help DMs just in general, but especially new DMs and new players.
Yeah, and I imagine, again, the strong suggestion of having like a sidekick is the fact that that can kind of be quite flexible to kind of accommodate for the player's weaknesses. So, because
yes.
I imagine, I know there are this sort of like the one-on-one sort of adventures where it's kind of preset with like you are this particular class, or you are. Whereas obviously letting the player bring any character to the table, if there's like a series of locked doors and the player is, I don't know, not a thief or a rogue, then they're probably gonna have a bit of a hard time. But then having this sidekick to kind of swoop in and be like, oh yeah, no, I've got like 50 lockpicks that I just.
Yeah, we try to do that of like, there's an NPC nearby who has, or, Barry, oh, surprise, under this rock, there's a lock picking kit. figure it out, you know.
I just like the idea that with it, there's someone's house out there who, instead of having like a key under like their doormat, they just have a lock picking kit. But like in the event that like they've lost their keys, they're like, oh, I guess I'll just pick the lock.
Thank goodness I left this here.
So I'm curious then. So when did the whole sort of I guess like writing sort of one-on-one adventures start for you?
So it started in late in 2018. So the first adventure that we published on DMsGuild was actually a slight revision of the first adventure that my husband wrote for me to kind of teach me how to play one-on-one. I've been very resistant to D&D. I knew I wouldn't like it. And then, of course, I loved it. But he created this adventure based on kind of the 3 pillars of play, where we've got the kind of the RP, we have some exploration, and we have a combat. And then in the second part of that adventure, put them together. And we were seeing so many people posting on Reddit, for example, asking for help with playing one-on-one. And it was like, okay, well, maybe we could help them. And so we put that adventure together and first published it in January of 2019, which was the same month that we launched our website. So those 2 things have kind of grown together.
Ah, God, nice. And then I believe as well, what is it? The if I've done my research correctly, I believe, what is it? So you participated in the RPG Writer Workshop to
Yes,
start writing
I
some
did.
solo content as well. Or just, I mean, I guess like, again, not as well, I guess, would you call like a lot of the adventures you do with your partner, are those sort of like D&D duet adventures, and then some of the adventures you've written by yourself are just like solo bit, or is it all kind of part of the D&D duet brand?
That's a good question. I see them all as the D&D Duet brand, though with the ones that I've written by myself, I did make more of an effort to kind of branch out and see maybe this could be played in groups, but I think that so much of our other stuff is oriented for one-on-one. Then I was like, no, that's fine. We'll just play it as a duet. And if you want to run it another way, go for it.
Yeah, I must admit, that's the thing. I suppose it is the case of like with D&D like duet style adventures, it is probably easier to scale up than it is to take an existing adventure and scale down.
Yes.
And so I'm curious then. So what was kind of the I don't suppose you want to talk about your kind of first your first adventure, your first publication.
Sure, I would love to. It's called First Blush, and we actually just published a really big revision of it at the end of this past year, because we've learned so much over the course of writing and publishing, and especially having so many people play through it, places where people were getting stuck. And so we did a really big revision, slightly moved where it is in the Forgotten Realms. And so I'm working through a revision of the 2 adventures that come after that right now. But it basically, you start in a castle, and you're kind of running around for a little bit, and then you get magically teleported somewhere where you weren't expecting and awaken an ancient warrior.
Oh, and then everything kind of unfolds from there.
Yeah.
No, I'm curious. So and then I know with, what is it? So with D&D, I believe you take kind of like turns with the DMing and sometimes being the player. You kind of pass it back and forth. I'm curious about like, is there any I guess like are there any telltale signs that is like that you? Well, what is my question? Is the like? I guess what would you say are like some of the attributes of your DMing style, I suppose?
Okay, so for me specifically, there are going to be lots of natural themes, and I try to write really immersive, intriguing settings because I really want the setting itself to be, you're in a magical world. It should be almost a character in and of itself. And so whenever I have the opportunity to bring something like that in, whether I'm DMing or designing, that's going to be on the table, I guess. And because I'm really interested in natural themes, and especially the imaginative power of RPGs to help us revisit and revise the way that we see the world around us and our connection to it. And so playing one-on-one is such a connected experience. It's a way of interacting really deeply with the person across the table from you. The RP, for instance, can be really, really deep, and I think it gives you more character-driven options.
Mm-hmm.
And so from there, I don't know. Now I've gone off on a tangent from your question, but definitely the environment, and then I love when, as a DM, having really deep RP with the player. And so Jonathan, my husband, and I have a stream that I DM, but then our game at home, he's almost always the DM for. So we have kind of two separate sets of characters.
Yeah.
It will switch occasionally, but usually keep them separate.
Oh, fair. So then I guess, so again, I don't know if this is do you think your focus on themes could be at all related to the fact that you're something of a published author? Again, maybe pulling at strings here. I don't know.
No, I definitely see them as connected, and my novels actually came out of that first adventure.
Really?
And DMing and everything. Yeah. It was, I got so involved in my character as a player, and I wrote all these side things for her, and almost like journals and kind of her thoughts on things that were happening as a way of kind of digging deeper into them. And I looked at this this kind of significant body of work. It was one of the longest things I'd ever written, and I had all these different documents. We had letters that the characters had exchanged back and forth, and my whole life I wanted to be a novelist. And so I'm looking at it and I was like, oh, I have 100,000 words of random things here. I could sit down and put together 100,000 words deliberately. And so yeah, the D&D actually led to, and the increase in confidence, I think, from publishing on DMsGuild, being part of the DMsGuild community, writing for our blog, kind of led me to this lifelong quest of being a published author.
That's again, it's always amazing to hear those sort of like stories of D&D as like a positive gateway.
Yes.
And I suppose there's also the thing of like, when people join your table, it's like, I've written a little bit of backstory, and then being able to slide a few novels across the table, like I just had a little bit of spare time. No, that's incredible. So then I guess then talking maybe a little bit more broadly then about kind of like your creative process then. So when it comes to sitting down for I guess anything, is there anywhere in particular that your ideas kind of stem from?
Yeah, so I feel like I spend a good portion of the day when I'm not writing or working just kind of daydreaming. And so that's where the ideas or characters kind of come from. They tend to be, whether it's a novel or an adventure, for me, it tends to start with a character or a scene. So I'll get kind of the emotion of a person in a particular place, and then things evolve from there. I tend to do some Pinterest research. I have like all these fantasy characters saved already so that I can kind of pull from them if I need to, or if I'm looking for something more specific that I don't have saved, I'll kind of delve into that a little bit and just kind of see what stands out. And so for me, it starts really visually, and then I just kind of sit down and start writing and put down whatever is kind of, it sounds like woo-woo, but whatever's coming to me, I put down. And then depending on the length of the thing, if it's a D&D adventure, I put down as many things as I know in kind of a loose template. And then when I get stuck, I go back to an outline and kind of figure out, okay, how are people going to get from this scene to this scene to this scene? And for the novels, it's similar, where I write the scenes that are kind of there that day, or the things that I'm kind of excited about. And I keep like a journal. It's just sitting right here from writing this morning. I keep a journal like right here for jotting down notes or ideas or questions for myself. And so then the things that I get stuck on in design or in fiction writing, just kind of put in the back of my mind and let that work on it, because I know at some point those problems are going to be solved, and then I can write them down.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, I feel like there's, when it comes to, at least, again, I can't speak for novel writing, but in terms of adventure writing, it does feel like there's a few different like schools of design where you can kind of go for almost like set piece. And again, I can imagine, especially for like duet style adventures, it's kind of important to have those kind of like natural like peaks. And alternatively, there is, I think the ones I can think of is you have set piece design, you have like character led design, and then you kind of have the more sort of open kind of sandboxy side of things. And it kind of sounds like very much kind of leaning towards the set piece with kind of character driven set pieces, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but I think that it's kind of like, here's a scene, and then here's a scene, and here's a scene. That's absolutely how I go about the design work. I would love for it to be really sandboxy, but it's just, just not how my brain works, I
Yeah.
don't think.
No, I must admit as well, as again, adventures in particular, they do have to have some constraints. And again, that's kind of what actually like one way I kind of visualize like sandbox type adventures. It is basically just a number of set pieces, just with distance between them, and there's less of like a linear thread through them in the fact that you just go from set piece to set piece. I'm curious. Is there any sort of like out of everything you've kind of done so far? Is there like a particular scene that kind of stands out as like one of your personal favorites?
Yes, and it's actually so. I was thinking through this character for the novels, but she also kind of ended up in one of my favorite adventures, the one that I wrote during the course of RPG Writer Workshop. So in the novels, her name is Yvain. I am pretty sure I know she's in the Heart of the Forest, and right now I'm like blanking on her name in the adventure because I had to kind of change it at the last minute. But so I just had this vision of this woman kind of standing around 11 woodwoads, where she's like just sacrificed her lover to the woodwoads, and like she is the kind of last bastion for this forest. And then that scene came about towards the end of my first novel, Buried Heroes, differently, but it's still a moment of sacrifice and of parting. But I wanted that moment to be one of extreme unity more so than just focusing on the loss and division. And like that was just kind of the feeling that I got from the scene. So it was fun to see it. I ended up writing it out for the adventure a lot faster than I ended up writing it out for the novel. It was almost, like 6 months separated at least. But that, the emotion and then the kind of surrounding fallen forest was the same for the two.
So I'm curious then. So like, I don't suppose you like have any sort of particular tips to writing? Well, again, because hearing that, it sounds like a very sort of like cinematic moment. And how do you necessarily bring that out in a adventure format? Is it just I'm curious.
That's such a good question. So for I think bringing it out in an adventure format, taking care with the kind of setup text, and then making sure that the DM has access to the character's motivations, to me should kind of create this really dramatic moment in game where you have things kind of coming to a head and this kind of an emotional climax to the adventure that tends to have some sort of ideally combat or a social encounter aspect to it, where things are, you've got this big reveal, or you are understanding this moment about this character that the PC is involved with. And so I think if we get the details to the DM for here's what's driving this person, and kind of here's what they're willing to give up or sacrifice for that thing, and then you can let that kind of sit with however the PC is going to react.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially. Again, I don't know if speaking from experience, but are duet adventures, are they more or less likely to go off the beaten path? But yeah, no.
So if I'm DMing them, yes, they're very likely to go off the beaten path. And so I really feel like it depends on the table, because we have some people who follow the adventures kind of piece by piece. Whereas like Jonathan and I have both started campaigns. I started running Descent into Avernus. He started running Curse of Strahd, where he almost immediately just left it behind. I like made it through a couple of chapters. I was so proud of myself. And then I was like, okay, we're set up now. Here we go into the unknown. And so that was really fun. But duet campaigns are so focused on the individual PC that to me, it seems like it would be really likely to kind of go off the beaten path. And that's why we're working on our first kind of full length one-on-one campaign right now. And we have a linear structure for the first part, and then we're working on a nodal structure. But that's still something that we're trying to figure out, is how do we set up the characters in such a way that people have lots of different options for the class that they're bringing to the table, but are still kind of headed toward these climactic moments and scenes without just sticking them on, like this is the one linear path. And so that is kind of hard. We have the first 3 adventures we published on DMsGuild, or 3 of the first adventures we published on DMsGuild, are the Crystal and Curse trilogy. And so they kind of lead to this big decision point for the PC. And then what we had imagined happening after that was, okay, now you're set up, you've started your duet campaign, congratulations, go forth and take the story wherever you want to go. Some people have totally done that, and I love hearing that. Like, we started our own campaign based on this, and that's really exciting for me, because that's how our campaign started too. But then other people are like, what's next in the story? And I'm like, oh, I didn't know that you would want me to keep going with this story. And so that's what I'm working on right now, as a follow-up adventure to that. But that's a really key question, and I'm curious to see. I hope that we are getting more and more, and we are getting more designers in the kind of one-on-one space. But as we have more people playing D&D in this way, as there are more adventurers and designers kind of coming into this space, I'm hoping to see where that could take us.
Yeah, no, it sounds very much like equivalent of, like, you know, you've had this pet for so long, and you finally let it off the leash, going, go run free. And it's still sitting there next to you going,
yeah,
I'm not done yet. No, I guess I'm fascinated as well. And from what you mentioned earlier about going back to First Blush to kind of address some of the feedback, I don't suppose you mind mentioning, like, what were some of the things that you kind of felt you needed to change about it?
Sure. So when we first published the adventure, I'll go way back to like initial mistakes. So DMsGuild, you're not supposed to publish things from like homebrew worlds. So we thought we were creating functionally a setting neutral space, because it wasn't our homebrew world. Looking back, it's like, duh, you set it in the Forgotten Realms. That's what I wish that we had done initially. So we revised that, grounded it in the Forgotten Realms, and it starts kind of near Amen. And then we moved it a little bit for First Blush, and that's the revision that I'm working on now for Second Dance and Third Time's the Charm, taking it a little bit more north. And I wanted it to have at least the option of connecting to the Waterdeep campaign, as I think that I think Dragon Heist would be really cool to run in a one-on-one format of all the published adventures. I think it would work really well, perhaps without quite as much tweaking or revision as you might need for one of the other adventures. So that was kind of the goal there. We revised that. There were a few scenes and places where we wanted things, I think we'd set things to be more open than some of the DMs running the adventures liked. And there was also a question of scale, where people were a little bit less comfortable maybe there were some PC deaths where they were not desired. And so it was like, okay, we can back off on this a little bit, and there's one dungeon that we needed to make a little bit clearer, because we could see it really, really well in our heads and knew what it looked like, but that coming across in the adventure was not as crystal clear as it should have been. And so reworking some of those things, we updated the maps. And so kind of some of those classic like initial mistakes that you really don't know as a designer until you've put some things out. We're both a little bit more free and loose with our DMing style, which I think I hope lends itself to fun and creative adventures, but some of the more there are some DMs who are a little bit more literally minded, or people who want to kind of follow, this is the thing that you've given me, this is the thing that I've bought, I want to be able to follow it. And so making things a bit more either linear or more easily usable in that way were some of the other changes that we made.
I mean, I think it's perfectly natural to, like, as you're writing an adventure, you write in your own DMing style. It's just kind of how you do it. And then eventually, once you kind of put it out in front of people are like, oh, I'm missing some gaps, or or what have you as a fact. It's that weird thing of, like, I guess you have to kind of move or adjust your DMing style to be more I guess more central in the case of, like, accommodating for everyone, and that can take a little bit of balancing, because there are other people who do want as you kind of mentioned, these kind of almost like incremental steps of, like, okay, now you've slain the dragon, you can have the hoard, or the hoard of gold, and now you need to return to the village, and
Exactly.
yeah. So then to talk a little bit more about your creative process. Is there any particular part of the whole process that is like a standout favorite part?
So the initial kind of idea creation, that incubation phase in the process, is one of my favorites, when you're just it's like kind of wading into the story or the scene or the setting or a particular character and figuring things out as you go. So any point in the writing process where I'm hitting a moment of discovery, or like a I love that. That's what I write for, is those moments when you figure something out. And the lovely thing about that is, I think that it can be really surprising. If you are surprised as the designer or the writer, it's going to come across, or it's probably going to come across, as surprising in a cool way to the people at the table, or reading the book, whichever it is. And so that's almost always my favorite part. I also love revision and the language polishing that comes with that, where you can add in a few more details about a particular setting, or playing with the wording that a character uses to make it really suited to their personality, and playing with metaphors some at that point. So that sort of polishing, tweaking, and sometimes it is bigger, of like moving huge set pieces around, but it's such a satisfying moment of getting to ask the questions and taking something from, you have good pieces, and then like, how do I make this great? And I love that part of it.
Yeah, no, I almost like it feels like sometimes when you're almost like troubleshooting like a part of an adventure, it does feel like almost like it's completing a puzzle that you yourself have set. And it's really kind of
Yeah.
satisfying to kind of where everything kind of slots into place, and you see that like everything takes shape, as to have that sort of like, this is how I'm going to do it, and then you type away with like a sort of a flurry of way too many words per second, and then you have to go through and obviously fix all the errors because you're typing too fast. No, I do like the sort of, I guess, the polishing. I was about to call it the fluff, but I think it's and yeah, I do notice there are times where, at least in my particular writing style, I do get caught a little bit too much with the fluff too soon. Just because sometimes it's fun. You gotta give yourself those little sort of like fluff treats along the adventure writing path to kind of keep you. On the other side of the coin, then, is there any parts of the project that kind of stand out as a bit like, oh?
Yes. So when I hit the like 50% in like the initial drafting of something, I tend to get really mired down. So that kind of long middle, 50 to 80, 85%, when I know where I'm going, and I'm having to fill back in the places that I skipped initially because I wasn't as excited about them, but then have decided this needs to be here, this is important. And so then kind of digging deep to figure out what needs to be there, or what's going to make it feel more exciting. And because if we're looking at it as a roller coaster, the dips are just as important as the heights. I just tend to write for the heights and then have to go back. So that 50 to 85%, I feel like it takes so long, in part because I've done most of the discovering, and sometimes I'll find something in part of that, and that's usually when they get turning again, is the discovery kind of comes back and like, oh yes, and can kind of go from there.
So actually, funnily enough, was it earlier you mentioned that how, as you come up with the sort of ideation part, you mentioned that sometimes you kind of refer back to kind of like a template of sorts. Is this kind of a template that you've kind of developed yourself, or is this kind of
it came about a little bit from some of the resources from RPG Writing Workshop, as well as some of the adventures we put together. So Jonathan and I have a Patreon for D&D Duet, and put together adventures every single month, a one-shot adventure every month. And so I tend to go back to that template, to where at least I have, and some of it is just like me not wanting to fight with Microsoft Word, of like, it has things formatted in the right way. So, okay, I have an idea for this. Oh gosh, now I'm so excited I like blanked on other things. Anyway, you have like the little block of the, like a random rolling table, for example, that's already formatted. So I'm not having to fight with the with the word formatting software to put like 1 through 8 and get the ideas down for that when I have them.
Yeah.
And so I think it's as much about form meeting with function as it is the, okay, well, this is how we've paced adventures in the past and those sorts of things.
So I'm curious, is there anything that kind of stands out in the sort of template that you have that is kind of bespoke, tailored for duet style adventures?
Yes. So we at the text at the beginning is almost always the same in them, and we like to let the DM know some kind of tips for scale and things like that along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And we've added in, I think it was James Indracasa who first was talking about this. It was a couple of years ago on Twitter, but adding in brackets for DM notes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've added those, and as we've written more adventures and gotten more feedback from DMs about how an adventure went or a moment when they wanted a little bit more help. And so those sort of scaling notes of, hey, yeah, we have 8 werewolves running toward your party right now. If you just have 1 PC, that's too many. However, whatever level that they are, because of the action economy. And so scale it down to 4 werewolves. It's still going to be exciting, but and so it's notes like that we like to leave for the DM kind of along the way. Whereas I think in a normal adventure you would have that if a PC is lying, for example, if they ask this question, this is how they'll say it. This is a lie. Here's what's actually going on.
Yeah.
So we have those things too, but adding in notes on scale or RP or just some kind of help for the DM.
Yeah, I can know. My mind goes straight back to that. If I were like running a one-on-one style adventure, I feel like I would need a good amount of like information about the PC before even running, just to kind of try and my best to kind of like tailor it all the way through. Is there it's such like it's a fascinating format just because it feels like D&D is when you imagine it is very much like the sort of like there is an entire group of adventurers, but being able to sort of have that sort of like more intimate sort of play style and stuff like that is it's amazing. And again in times of these gestures I think it's fascinating to kind of see the sort of uptick in interest in these sort of duet style adventures.
And if I can add really fast too,
please.
I think that one of the really important things about the duet style adventures is to set the player up to be really active. We think of it as like if you have DM and players on kind of opposite ends of a pole in duet style, they're kind of both coming towards each other, where the DM, because of their DM PC and trying to bring the world to life, there's an extra amount of things kind of resting on their shoulders, and it just needs to be super collaborative between the two. So the player needs to take a little bit more charge than they normally might in helping the narrative progress. And that's part of how I think things can get off the rails so fast, is if the player's used to adding in more things, well, there they go, and you're just kind of running to catch up. And then for the DM, there's some more playery aspects where they are depending on this other person to kind of help them create the world. And so I think that's a really cool and exciting part of one-on-one play. But that's another one of those things to keep in mind with the design is, and those moments of keeping things open versus closed. Where do you need to lean on the mechanics, and where do you not?
I guess it goes back to the introducing a DMPC, and maybe not not like a very commanding character, because then it feels like, well, it's just me and my character and the other player who is kind of just listening to me twice.
Exactly.
No, incredible. So across everything that you've kind of done, then we kind of spoke about like some of the kind of narrative beats that you're kind of particularly proud of. Is there like a singular design choice that you've intentionally made that you're particularly proud of?
That's such a good question. Like just in creating something.
I maybe in one of the particular adventures, just something that like I don't know, everything about it clicks.
Yeah. Okay. So there's this adventure that I wrote as part of an anthology, Blood Ties, that I reworked and published in as a one-on-one adventure, Totems of the Svalage Woods, and set in Barovia. and the creature that I made, so I made a Leshen as the like this is the big bad in the adventure, and just the mechanics of his combat style, like if he rolls well and is, you know, played kind of to his max ability, he's like a party killer all by himself. And like having such a, at the end of a darker adventure, having such a powerful creature that is so dependent on his environment, as well as like how ferocious the DM is feeling in that moment, was really like satisfying. And I don't know, designing that, I mean, like, oh yes, I was a little bit surprised because I tend to be when we're playing, I have a lot more experience as the player in one-on-one than I do as the DM, besides our kind of writing and design. And a lot of the advice comes out of things I've learned from watching Jonathan, or kind of those moments where we've hit a hitch in our game together. How can I help other people avoid that? But then this was really coming from the flip side. Like when I first started DMing, I was really hesitant to run the monsters as powerfully as I could, because I'm like, no, I don't want to hurt the characters. But I don't know. It felt like a growth moment of figuring out how would a particular creature be potentially really devastating in a one-on-one sort of environment. So it was kind of coming full circle as a designer of, I'm not just encouraging someone to create a really cool, powerful, or slightly enhanced in terms of power PC to run around in this world. This is the same thing before the creature.
So I'm curious, are there any sort of like standout abilities? Like what makes it so deadly?
So I gave him the assassinate ability, and like he, you know, so at that moment that he can surprise the party. But that's kind of the inevitability of that adventure, is that they're going to run into the Leshen, that they can decide to, or he's going to find them. And so that was another one of the things that I thought was really exciting. But I don't know if it was Misty Step or something like that. Maybe it was just like he has an incredible amount of movement. And so that and a high stealth combined with the assassinate, like it's simple in the design, but put together with, you know, maybe you have the PC, a DM PC, and then the main NPC of the adventure, but it's still going to be potentially super challenging, but also I hope fun for the player to figure out, oh my gosh, this person just killed our little guide. What do I do?
Yeah.
And I thought that could be a really cool challenge.
No, yeah, I think again, there is that moment when you come into an encounter, and the moment like the damage dice is rolled, and the DM's like, they do 37 damage. You're like, oh, that's a lot. That's more than I was prepared for. And then it immediately rechanges like your plan, because you're just like, this is not something we can just hack and slash our way through anymore.
Yeah.
I did want to ask as well. So looking at your catalog on the DMsGuild, you've also dabbled a little bit with subclasses.
Yes, I have. I have 2 druid subclasses on there, and I keep meaning there's another 1 or 2 that I keep meaning to put up, and then I really want to create an adapted demon hunter, like from Diablo ranger subclass that, and I've started all 3 of those things. Of for the ranger, for example, I wanted to figure out a way for, instead of them being magical, for them to be more reliant on setting traps and kind of having maybe having potions, maybe not, I don't know. But if you took away a ranger's magic but wanted to give them the same sets of abilities by their, you know, myriad accessories, what would that look like?
Yeah, I must admit, the Demon Hunter from Diablo is particularly iconic as well. It's like, it's kind of the flurry of bolts. They tumble and roll through the thing. So I'm guessing with writing 2 druid subclasses, is that something of like revealing your preference in terms of?
Yes, yeah. Almost all my adventures involve druids or are adjacent to druids. I love them. I think they're so interesting, and so yeah, they tend to come up a lot. But the one I wanted to have like a really light, almost radiant based druid, and then the other one is more designed for an urban environment, and I wanted to kind of play with what that looks like, as well as challenge I think there's that stereotype of like the lone shaman in the forest who's just, you know, very serene and put away. Like, no, I want a like sparkly, interesting urban druid who recognizes that people are just as much part of the environment that, you know, that she's running into every day as the birds, animals, trees, whatever it is that's around.
So I guess I'm curious. So what was the kind of the I guess impetus behind the subclasses? Was it a case of like it started with one of the adventures and you're like, oh, this is a cool character, or yeah?
The Circle of Sunlight one did. It started as an NPC that when I was DMing for the two of us, and then later kind of spurred on to an adventure. So that's how that one started. And then the other, Jonathan was going to DM for me and a couple other people, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and I wanted an urban druid, and I couldn't quite. I got a little stuck on deciding which of the subclasses I thought would fit her the best, and so designed the subclass for her instead.
I mean, that is the kind of case of like, well, nothing works. I'm just going to make my own thing.
Exactly.
No, yeah, I must admit, yeah, I don't know if I've been to well, but I do really love the design of Waterdeep Dragon Heist. Just the flow of that adventure, it feels so different. It almost feels cosmopolitan in adventuring, which
yes.
And I think that's probably why in the grand scale of everything that I've done, 9 times out of 10 it probably does return to Waterdeep. So then I guess to kind of round off your design process and everything as a whole, then you touched on this a little bit towards the start, but are there any sort of like key lessons that you kind of wish you'd learned just a little sooner?
Yeah, I wish I had seen the wealth of lore in the Forgotten Realms, as well as the published adventures and everything, for the treasure trove that they are, instead of getting some of the things I got kind of frustrated by with like the way that it's some of the things in the world seemed like kind of Deus Ex Machina-ish to me, or I felt frustrated that, like, you know, it's just about the characters moving around the world. The world doesn't always feel like it's moving in spite of them. Like if nobody does anything, what's going to happen? So I wish that I had, instead of getting kind of stuck or frustrated on those things, embraced and just like pulled from the wealth of lore about the Forgotten Realms. Some of that was like crankiness on my part, and some of that was just there's so much information, and then that can be really overwhelming too. And I don't know, I felt like, okay, if I take information that's already there and accidentally mess it up, some amorphous like blob of people are going to be really frustrated with me.
The lore wizards.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course that hasn't happened. And maybe at some point it does. That's okay. But I would rather be creating things that are easier for new DMs to pull from. And so that's been I got a little delayed in my revision of, we've got these like 3 adventures that go together, Second Glance and Third Time's the Charm, so adventures 2 and 3 in those. And so I've been hearing from DMs running the adventures like, hey, we're noticing these setting inconsistencies. I'm like, I know, I promise I'm working on it. I'm hoping to get that up like this weekend or next or something. And it's been, one of them was like, I'm a new DM. I did all this research. Here's where I think it makes sense for this to go. And it was the same place I'd been thinking about, but it was just like, this is so cool. Like, you're going to do such a good job running your duet game because you put in all of this work and effort into getting this ready for your, I think he was running it for either his girlfriend or his wife. I can't remember. But anyway, you've done all this work on your end as the DM to kind of put things on. And it was really important for me to kind of, I don't know, recognize that you're not doing it alone as a game designer. Like, you're helping someone else do their own creative work and processing and everything. And that was just like so fun and encouraging for me, for a new DM to like have found this really cool website that's like a map of the Forgotten Realms where they can click on the different lore and things. And it was awesome.
I thought those sort of those kind of stories are so sort of heartwarming. It's like, oh, they took all the effort through. Are there any, I guess, how have you found the process of taking a sort of setting agnostic adventure and kind of placing it? Because again, like looking at the map of the Forgotten Realms and just with a pin to be like, I guess here, I can't imagine it being a simple task.
Yeah, some of it was kind of, we've got the Sword Coast Adventurers guide, so it was like pouring through that, and I was like, okay, I know I need a forest, but I need that forest to have a body of water near it, or stuff like that. And so it was a little overwhelming and certainly a process of trial and error.
Mm-hmm.
But now that I have like once after making the first decision, which I think that was the hardest part of instead of going from some of sort of amorphous space, choose a place and then fitting everything else around it. And in subsequent adventures, that hasn't been a problem so much. The adventure I wrote with RPG Writer Workshop was more setting agnostic too, but I was better able to kind of have some suggestions of here are some places where you could set this or this type of environment, and it wasn't as dependent on being in an exact location, I guess.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think, and it's the funny thing of like as you kind of go through and you end up with a good amount of lore for a very small part of the sort coast is about or you know the Forgotten Realms as a whole, and sometimes again I found this with I wrote an adventure about a dead god basically, I think it's Tai Chi, and now anytime I write about any, I feel the need to just write in just a little reference somewhere. Because I've done all this research, and I'll be damned if I don't like crowbar it in at every opportunity to go. Oh, you know the story of Tai Chi, right? And then that's the paragraph done. Actually, I don't suppose. Are there any sort of like small tidbits of lore that kind of stand out in your research?
Oh, that's a good question too. I going back to Waterdeep, and this is more a project that is very much in the kind of initial phases, but I would love to write more things for Waterdeep or like the city around it. But I'm fascinated by the city of the dead, the like and the floaty lights that come over, like some of the way that the Waterdeep embraces and kind of brings to life just a city. It makes a city feel real in such a way that I don't know that I would have believed possible for an RPG setting. And so like that was really cool. But in addition to that, just kind of the embrace of inexplicable magic in a particular place that's not too much. Like it's been really well thought through, but these are effects that they're not hurting anybody, but they're just kind of sitting there. Or the alley where people like float through the air and dance. Like I've started on, I haven't finished it yet, but I wanted to design like a date night sort of little baby one shots in Waterdeep where it's more
nice.
like, okay, you've got an hour to play. Where would you go on a date in Waterdeep? Because it's such a romantic city. And so those have been really fun to play with too. And so I think I didn't know that that's like Forgotten Realms wide exploration, but some of those little details I love.
Yeah, no, again, just the same way of like reading about the sort of there's also an alley where there's I think it's Rude Stroll, who's like a ghost who touches, like if he touches you, you learn a secret potentially. If you survive, which it's one of those like I just wouldn't go down that alleyway. If I lived in Waterdeep, I would take the long way around every time just because I don't want to.
Not worth it.
Yeah. No, incredible. And I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit then. So is this kind of Waterdeep date night thing? That's kind of something that's in the works. But beyond that, are there any sort of particular dream projects or anything that you kind of have?
Yes. So I have started the Waterdeep project. The next like big release is Feywild Foray. It's just a project I've been like stuck on for a little while. Like I got stuck in the writing process of it and it keeps getting bigger. And so that becomes problematic in its own way. But I intended for that to be kind of the follow-up to the Crystal and Curse trilogy. And so I'm really excited about that. And that's connected to like my dream project. I have, I think, two. My dream project in terms of like things for DMsGuild or related to like Wizards of the Coast work would be a like Feywild setting and adventure book that's just like really embracing the magic of this space. And I would love to see play between like the Feywild and the Shadowfell, because I think those are the two spaces and like all the lore realms with the creatures that I'm the most fascinated by. But I would just love to see like more of the denizens of the Feywild. I like playing with the different courts and things like that. And then kind of expanding beyond that, my other dream project would be something that kind of brings together flora and fauna of a particular place or setting or something that has like lore and backstory behind it, as well as useful stat blocks, crafting details, maybe an NPC or two who like could tell you about these places. And so kind of playing with that and bringing together lots of different pretend plants and their uses. So almost like a druid's guide to a particular space or place that is unique and interesting with beautiful art that is like fun to just kind of sit and flip through, as well as useful at the table.
Yeah, no, the druid strikes again. It seems, no, but no, 100. Yeah, I like, I particularly when it comes to like the Feywild, I feel like the small tidbits you get within kind of like the player's handbook and Dungeon Master Guide is like, I feel like it doesn't quite capture the whimsical nature of Fey. And I feel like, again, it's hard to get across that this world is like ours, but it's like amped up to 10. There's like weird flowers all over the place. And there's, people the same way with like any times of like flowers or herbalism. There is 9 times out of 10 there is always that play of like, can I make a potion out of this? What happens if I eat this?
Yeah. Like, you know, I put it under my tongue. Then what happens?
Yeah, no, it's always nice to have an NPC on hand to be like, well, now that you've placed it under your tongue, we have to go find you a medic. We have about 10 minutes. No, also, again, both of those sounds like sort of like super awesome products, and I do like this sort of like all-in-ones. Like, again, the fact that it's like all-encompassing, like it's your go-to book for like herbalism on the go. And just to kind of like be able to like, oh well, this is a a particularly flora rich area, and then people are like, oh, I want to find some plants of some kind, and now you have a book to hand to kind of tackle that.
Yeah. Oh, good. Here you go.
Yeah. Oh. So, no, fantastic. No, again, I probably like it's a case of like in the horizon soon.
I hope so. Yeah.
No. So, talking a little bit more then about the tabletop RPG community as a whole, and the DM's Guild. Again, the DM's Guild within the tabletop community. There's like a series of umbrellas. Are there some people that you kind of want to shout out as being particularly inspiring?
Yes. I love this question. I think it's so cool. So I'm going to start cheesy first, and then I have a more specific answer. But like the DMsGuild community as a whole, in and of itself, is a constant source of inspiration for me, because I see these projects that I would never have dreamed of or conceptualized that have been beautifully put together. The amount of collaboration I think is so cool. But one of the things that is a lesson I've been learning over the past year as a writer is like lean into what it is that you do that's special, as well as like what's really exciting for you. So for me, if I get stuck in my fiction, for example, and need something to happen, I lean into like wolves, fae, druidy things, something along those lines, because the people who like my books will love those things. Yeah. And I think the same holds true for D&D. So instead of trying to like, okay, what's something different than what I've done? Because that was, I think, where I got stuck at sometimes before, where you're trying to kind of remake the mold of yourself, instead of like, no, lean into and embrace the things that you care about and the things that are unique to you, because that's where you're really going to find like your ideal readers, players, and DMs. And so the DMs Guild community is a constant reminder of that for me, of just seeing the wide variety of creative projects that people are putting together. And then more specifically, Lisa Penrose and Ashley Warren are like two of my very favorite and most inspiring people in the community as a whole. I love all the different interesting work that Lisa is doing to kind of boost individual designers and support the community, boosting the brand of DM's Guild and One Bookshelf, and kind of re-looking at something that already exists and figuring out, okay, well, how can we do this better? Or how can we do more of things that we're kind of lacking in? I think that's really cool. And I also love the way that she has been like branching out from like just D&D things, where I like, if you're just looking at her Twitter presence, for example, like you get these cool witchy things and these other more personal things. And I just, that sense of like allowing people to know you in a broader scale, I think is really, really special. And then all the work that Ashley Warren is doing for designers and fostering more creators coming into the community, and keeping that abundance mindset like really on the forefront of what's going on in the community, I think is so important and inspiring. And I just love it. And I mean, she too, branching from RPG Writers Workshop to the Storytelling Collective and some of the different projects that they've done. Like I worked with her in September on Short Story September, and so I got to work with some of the writers more individually, and that was really cool and special. And I don't know, yeah, those would be the community as a whole, and then those two people specifically.
No, again, it's ridiculous. I can't disagree. But no, yeah, it is always fascinating, especially you see the people on the DMs Guild who lean into their strengths and they find their sort of their niche, and seeing every product just knock it out of the park, time after time.
Yes.
And that's kind of always inspiring in itself. And yeah, obviously both Lisa and Hannah, obviously the sort of like gates open, everyone come on in, like the way they sort of like champion our hobby and kind of beyond, and kind of encourage again so many people who wouldn't have even considered it if they hadn't kind of paved the way. It's incredible. Oh, it's lovely. Then I guess to chat a little bit more about you then, what are you currently working on? And as like a two-part of that question, where can people hear about it? Because again, that's the important part.
Yeah. So I have a couple of projects in the works right now. I'm working on, through our Patreon, we're doing a vampire campaign. And so I'm working on a prequel adventure for that one to kind of get from like level 1 to level 3 when you are popping into this like vampire-y space. And so any of the D&D work people can find out about at dndduet.com. If you want the like initial adventures that we're releasing for that, we're on patreon.com/GroveGuardianPress. I'm also working on Feywild Foray, which my goal is like before the end of March that it appears on DMsGuild. So that's like, fingers crossed that happens. I'm also working on the third novel in my Age of Azuria fantasy series. And so it's coming out later this year. I don't have a date for it yet. It's going to my editor at the end of March. And so those are kind of my projects at the moment. I just finished revising my third novella for the series, and it's coming out, I think, June 1st. It's called Story Magic. It's going to be lovely. I had so much fun. I don't know. I had a lot of like play and fun writing that one. So lots of different things. I'm on Twitter at Grove Guardian, and then on Instagram at D&D Duet. And then my husband does our like D&D Duet Twitter-ing. And so that I help with that occasionally, but mostly that's him.
No, like I said, so there will be links and connections to everything. Yeah, again, it sounds like March is a busy month for you.
I think so. I think I maybe put too many things in March, so we'll see how it goes. But it's like spring is coming, that tends to bring with it like a burst of energy. So I'm hoping that all of the things fall into place, and that I definitely haven't put too many things on my own schedule. That never happened.
It's hoping for a calm April, just to kind of even things out just a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for taking some time to sit down. Again, it's always the case, but the hour flies by, as it wants to. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been a delight. I guess I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I've got some things that I can actually talk about now. You can find the Oath of the Hurler, which is a throwing-based paladin subclass. That is out and about. There'll be a link in the bottom description for people to check out, and maybe some other things. But I'm just going to leave it with that at the moment. So, my final question then, in closing, Beth, how do you end a podcast?
Okay, I came up with a little phrase for this, and I hope anyway. So I would say, thanks so much for joining us today. May all the inspiration find you with a pen or keyboard close at hand.
Oh.